Thank you, Raquel. It's always a great pleasure to work with you. It was a lovely event that we did together in Brazil, and I always think of it. Actually, I will mention it as part of one of the things that Richard said that we translated. But anyway, I'm going to just briefly introduce myself. My name's Paulo. I'm originally from Sao Paulo, but I spent a long time in the United Kingdom. I spent 20 years in the UK. I'm actually in the UK right now. Um, and I've worked in Brazil and in the UK and in the US and in Spain and in Chile with simultaneous interpretation. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey to get to be an interpreter, which I absolutely love being an interpreter. I love the idea of connecting people, connecting ideas, connecting cultures. Those of you who are involved with interpretation will know that there is a real buzz in doing it. You know, it's a real, it's almost addictive. You know, we do it once, we want to do it all the time. So, um, obviously, to be an interpreter, you need to be able to speak at least a couple of languages fairly well. And being from a poor family in Sao Paulo, I never really had a chance to learn languages. When I was 14, my grandfather had a friend who was a manager in a language school. And he said to me, oh, you know, I can get you a scholarship. So I was very happy about that. And I talked to my mum about it. And it was across the town. You know, I needed to catch a couple of buses to get to the English school. And my mum said, sorry, we don't have the money for the bus. So that was a bit of a disappointment. And I was like, okay, you know, I was about 12, 13, something like that, maybe 14. And then I carried on, you know, trying to study, trying to get on with life. And when I was 18, I got a job at Hilton Hotel in Sao Paulo. And I, I remember having this conversation with this lady. I went to work as I was sort of a reservations recording person. So I had to record all the guests that came through the hotel. You know, in the old times, everything was done by hand. So people used to complete a form when they checked in a hotel. They used to complete a form just, you know, with their full name, their address, their details, perhaps a document. And we used to transfer all that information into a book that was available for the police to check in case they needed it. So I got that job and I reported to the reception manager, who was this lady who was about 40 years old at the time, you know, like 20 years older than me. And she was very refined. She was a dark lady, a black lady, but she um, dressed very, very nicely and she spoke very beautifully. Sonia, her name was. And she called me into her office one day and she said to me, Paolo, I have to tell you that if you want to be anybody in the hotel industry, in the hotel business, you have to learn English. I'm grateful to her to this day because I thought, okay, I really heard her, you know, and I thought I will have to go and study, and I have to learn English. So, with my first salary, I went and registered in an English school, and I started to learn English, and then I thought, oh, I'll learn French as well because I had a little bit of contact with French at school. So I tried that, didn't like it, but I continued with English. And then a few years later, um, I got an offer of a job in the Caribbean to work in Royal Caribbean Cruise Line. So off I went to the United States. I was 21. I went to the United States first, and then I used to work on a 7-day cruise that left Puerto Rico in the United States, went to Barbados, one of the Caribbean islands, then to Antigua, St. Lucia, St. Martin, and the United States Virgin Islands, and then back to Puerto Rico. And then we'd change all the passengers and then go around again. Obviously, working in the Caribbean was an interesting experience because, first of all, I had to speak English. And secondly, I was working with mostly Jamaicans. So it was very, very difficult to understand them. So it was a little bit of a baptism of fire with English. But anyway, I stayed there for some time and I improved my English a lot and also picked up a little bit of Spanish because there were lots of Mexican passengers and, in Puerto Rico, they spoke Spanish as well. So I had the opportunity to develop my English and my Spanish for that year that I worked there. Working on a cruise line was a very, very interesting experience, but very difficult. You work many hours most days. But I got to travel, which I loved. And after being there for a few months, working in the Caribbean islands, I got to see at least 20 different Caribbean islands, which was a pleasure. Then I was asked if I would be interested in taking a cruise to Europe. And of course, I was. And many of the Jamaican people, the Caribbean men, didn't really want to leave their families to come to Europe, and I didn't have a family. I was a single man at the time. So I thought, okay, I'll go. So I got to come to Europe I came on a transatlantic, we left Puerto Rico, Barbados, and then we came across from Barbados to Africa, originally to Senegal, and then up to the Spanish islands. What island did we go to? Canary Island. And then, we got to see a lot of the Mediterranean up to the Baltic. So I was very lucky to get to see France, Germany, Italy, Holland, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Scotland, the Baltic countries, Norway, Finland, Denmark, lots and lots of countries. And then after that, I went back to Brazil and started teaching English. That was the beginning of my teaching career. I was about 21 to 22. I'd been in America for 1 year. So, I immediately got work teaching English at a couple of schools in Sao Paulo. So I stayed in Sao Paulo for about a year. And then I decided that I wanted to come to Europe. I wanted to come to England to, pick up a little bit of proper English rather than American English. So I came to the United Kingdom in 1993. But luckily enough, when I was preparing to come to the United Kingdom, I went to a travel agency that I used to work for to get a reference letter. And when I arrived there, the owner of the travel agency, Wilson, said to me, Paulo, I've got just the job for you. I said, well, I'm actually not looking for a job. I'm going to Europe. And he said, no, you're going to want this job. I said, oh, okay, let's see. He said, look, there's this man who wants someone to be his translator. He's an older man and he just wants someone to travel with him. And you know, as you walked into there, I thought, oh, Paulo would be the right person. Someone had asked me if I knew anyone. So could you go and talk to this man in this other travel agency? I said, okay. So I went there and I spoke to this man and said, look, you know, this man, Dr. Nilo Varani, wants someone to accompany him. He's a veterinary surgeon. He works with animals, right? And he has a big clinic in Sao Paulo, and he wants to go and visit some hospitals, veterinary hospitals and university in Europe to get some ideas. And he wants someone to go with him to translate. Can you go and speak to him? I said, okay. So I took the bus and I went to this enormous clinic that this man was the owner of. He was about 60, I think he was 63 years old. And he interviewed me. Basically, he talked to me a little bit and he told me he would like me to go with him. You know, I didn't speak English very well, but he didn't know that. So, you know, I spoke English enough. I mean, I was a teacher, but I just didn't have the fluency. Anyway, he said, yeah, I want you to come with me. What I need you to do is I need you to have pockets inside your clothes to keep money and passports. And we'll go, you know, we'll go in about 3 weeks. So at the time, there was no internet, okay? So nothing was done by email or WhatsApp. Everything was done on paper. So he said, I'll send you the itinerary for the trip. So I received this bunch of papers, you know, it was like 5 or 6 pages. I keep it to this day somewhere in the house. And this was the itinerary. And it had lots of names of places that I never heard before. I was a well-traveled person because I'd been to Europe and to America and to the Caribbean. But there were places like Ho Chi Minh City and Yangon and Bali and Yogyakarta and Jakarta and Colombo and Sri Lanka and Kuala Lumpur, names that I'd never heard before. So I looked through and I was like, okay. So I went to travel with this man for 45 days as his translator. We came to Europe, to England, and then we went up to Scotland and Ireland. And then we flew to Bangkok in Thailand. And then we went to Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos and Burma or Myanmar, to Sri Lanka, Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, Java, Bali. And then I came back to the United Kingdom and he went back to Brazil. And that was my beginning of my journey in the UK. So I was 23 years old when I arrived here. It was a long time ago. And obviously, just like all Brazilians do, you know, I just accepted any jobs and did anything that was possible. I was here on a student visa at the beginning, so I had the right to work 20 hours a week. Back then, you know, it was easier to get a student visa here in England. And then after being here for a few months, I met my wife now. And then I got married and stayed here, had 2 children. My son, who works with me sometimes as an interpreter as well, who's here. And my youngest son. They're 28 and 24 years old now. So I stayed in England and I worked doing what I could. To begin with, I had a job doing market research interviewing. I was lucky enough to get a job doing interviewing in Portuguese, English, and Spanish. So for 4 years, I did that. And then I managed to get into a teaching course and I started teaching English, Portuguese, and Spanish. Obviously, the demand for English is much bigger than for Portuguese and Spanish. So I ended up working in a college teaching English to speakers of other languages full time from the year of 1998 until around 2009, when I decided to go back to Brazil. So I'd been teaching, I had that one job doing translation that I didn't even know what interpreters were, didn't even know about the profession, even though that was more or less what I did. I did consecutive translation at the time for the veterinary surgeon. So I spent many, many years teaching, and then in 2009, I decided that I wanted to take my family to Brazil because my boys didn't speak Portuguese that well, and I wanted them to be really properly bilingual. So I convinced my wife, who's English, to move to Brazil with us. So we all moved to Brazil in 2009. And all I could do well was teach English. I was very good at that, and I'd been doing it for many years. So I started to, try and put together a few groups and that. And I was struggling. It was difficult. It was difficult to earn money in Florianopolis teaching English. But anyway, I had a few students. And then one day I went to teach one of my students who was an Argentinian, who is an Argentinian lady. And it was my birthday, but I never told my students, that it was my birthday. So I just got there in the morning, said, oh, hello, good morning, and I started teaching her. And she said to me, look, could you leave about 10 minutes at the end of our class today? Because I wanted to talk to someone, to you about something. I said, oh, okay, no problem. So we had the class as normal, it was, they were very specific classes, I was teaching her vocabulary related to chemical engineering, and, I was helping her translate some papers for publication, and really, obviously doing the general teaching, but also very specific things. So anyway, we carried on with the class, and 10 minutes before the class ended, I said to her, oh, what did you want to talk to me about? And she said, well, Paulo, I'm organizing a conference and I want you to translate it. I said, oh, what, you want me to translate the information, the program of the conference? She said, no, I want you to translate the conference. I said, no. I mean, I can translate the information about the conference, the materials, but I can't translate the conference. She said, no, I want you to do it because I've seen a lot of really bad interpretations before, especially in the chemical engineering industry. And I know that you know the vocabulary because I've been working with you for a while and I want you to do it. I said, oh, no, Sylvia, you're crazy. No way. I can't do that. You need to hire interpreters, translators. And then she wrote down on a piece of paper. At the time, this was many, many years ago in 2011, she wrote down 6,000 reais. And I was struggling to earn like 2,000, 2.5 teaching, and driving all over the island and doing crazy things. So when she wrote that down and she took that piece of paper in front of me, I smiled and I said, oh, of course, Sylvia. That's what I've always wanted to do. It's always been my dream. And then I thought, okay, now, Paulo, you're in trouble. I couldn't say no. And it was very difficult, and I had no idea of what I was letting myself in for. But I said to her, yeah, that's okay. I would do it. So I went home, and of course, by then we already had the internet. Things were much easier. I just Googled, all the information about what conference interpreting meant, what it was, and started to find out about it. I realized that you can't do it alone. You need two people. So I had to find someone who was willing to work with me. So I started to phone some people. And of course, no interpreter in the right state of mind would accept to work with someone who's never worked with it before. So as I phoned these people, they're like, no, sorry, I'm not interested. I'm too busy, and put the phone down. So I spoke to a few of these people, and nobody was prepared to even talk to me. And I thought, well, I need to learn how to do this. And all I had back then, we didn't have mobile phones with, YouTube, nothing like that. So all I had was an MP3 with some meditations that my wife used to listen to, and she used to listen to some talks by some self-development people. So Pema Chodron was the name of this lady, who was a Buddhist nun, if I'm not mistaken. So I had this MP3, which is a device, with phones, and I used to walk, and I lived in Florianopolis near a forest. So I used to walk through the forest with these earplugs in, with the ear headsets, listening to this MP3, these talks by this Buddhist nun, with my dogs, trying to translate what this lady was saying and failing miserably, not managing at all. And getting more and more stressed, and like sometimes kind of crying, walking around the forest, and people must have thought this man is totally crazy, right? And I kept trying it. And in this meantime, I'm talking to people, and I found I found two interpreters who would be prepared to work with me. One of them lived in New York and the other one in Sao Paulo. And I was like, okay. So I kept trying and trying. One day it clicked. I was listening to something and I started translating it, and it started to happen. It just started to happen. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I, I was ready. I only had 2 months to get ready, which is crazy. It was like the 19th of September, 2011, this lady told me about the job. The job was on the 15th of November, so I had just under 2 months to become an interpreter. Luckily, I spoke English well enough and Portuguese well enough, and I had enough knowledge of the subject. So I also got to translate all the materials in preparation for the course. So I was very familiar with all the materials. And I decided I was going to hire this lady from Rio de Janeiro who lived in New York. But I also had spoken to a man in Sao Paulo who seemed quite good. Anyway, the lady from Rio de Janeiro was all organized and stuff. And then 3 days before the event, she sent me a message saying that she had suspected pneumonia, when you can't breathe, problems in your lungs. So she sent me a message saying that, and I was like, oh my God, I went into total panic. And luckily, I decided to phone this man in Sao Paulo, and he said, no problem, I'll come out, do the work with you. And he said he could do the whole day on his own, So I said, well, it's good, because if I can't do it, at least he can do it. It was 5 days job, it was a well-paid job, so I hired him, and he went to Florianopolis, and we worked together. So in the end, he started, and he did it for about 15 minutes, and then I took over, and it worked really well, and I carried on, and I just loved it, and I never stopped it since then. So that was in 2011, the 15th of November, which is the proclamation of Republic in Brazil, right? 2011 was my first proper simultaneous interpretation in the booth at the Federal University of Santa Catarina. So that was the beginning of my interpreting career. I don't know how long I've got, and I've been talking for half an hour. I'm going to carry on for 15 minutes, and then I'll stop for questions, all right? So, since the beginning of my career as an interpreter, I have done some very, very, very interesting jobs. I've been very, very lucky with the jobs I've had, and I did a lot of work in the area of nuclear energy. I did a lot of work in the area of homeopathy, a lot of work in the area of psychology, but especially police investigation and police interviewing. A lot of work with medical devices, thanks to Raquel. And a lot of work with meditation and alternative therapies, healing, quantum physics, training, commercial banking, business. I've done practically everything. There are very few things that I wouldn't touch. Most things, if there is enough time to study and enough materials, I will take it on. So I have learned a lot from the profession, because we obviously, as an interpreter, you have to study. I never really liked studying when I was younger, but it's really important for our profession to be very familiar with what you're going to work with. So it pays off in the long run. I think it's worth spending the time studying and preparing yourself to do a good job. And let me have a look at my little notes here and see what else I can tell you about. Yeah, I think one of the things when I was thinking of what I was going to talk to you guys about, I was considering the different things. And I think one of the things that came up that I think is interesting is what we do in life that is good for us. Because many times we go through life taking care of everything and everyone, but we're not really taking care of ourselves. And I think that's a really important thing, especially as an interpreter. You need to be healthy, you need to be well in your mind, in your body, because it's a tough job, it's very demanding. So I wanted to share some of the things that I've done that are very useful in life. So one of the jobs that I did, let me try and remember when that was, 2013, 14. I started to do this work for this lady from Florianopolis, which was to do with conflict transformation or conflict resolution. And they had this man from Austria who came and did his talks. And in one of these courses that I translated for her, there was this lady from Sao Paulo who said to me, "Oh, can I take your details? Because I'm organizing a conference in Sao Paulo and I would like to, tell them about you. We're going to need simultaneous translation." I was like, "Oh, yeah, of course you can, it will be a pleasure." So within a few days, they sent me an inquiry. They asked me to send them a quote for the simultaneous translation of the International Congress of Mindfulness, which was held 1 year in Brazil, 1 year in Spain, 1 year in Brazil, 1 year in Spain. So it was mostly English, Portuguese, but there was a little bit of Spanish as well. So I took that on. In 2013, I think I did the first one. And then I got really into meditation because this was about meditation. And I had just done a course on meditation in Florianopolis, so it was really interesting. And since then, I've translated the International Conference of Mindfulness at least 5 times, and I've translated several other related conferences, congresses, symposiums, meetings. And I've really enjoyed practicing meditation through the people that I met, translating and interpreting. You know, there's a very famous man called John Kabat-Zinn who brought mindfulness meditation into the West. And he did some courses during the pandemics for free, and it was fantastic. So meditating is one of those things that I did for myself that's absolutely wonderful. Um, then another thing that I do that really helps me to keep healthy and well is I practice Qigong. So twice a week, I do a 45 minutes to 1 hour practice of Qigong, which is similar to Tai Chi Chuan.